Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So earlier I saw a debate between Bill Maher and Cornel West, and they were talking about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And basically, Bill Maher was saying that Hillary Clinton would have been a far better president than Donald Trump. And Bill Maher also criticized Cornel West for suggesting that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were essentially the same or virtually equally as bad. And Bill Maher cited examples of differences, including their different positions with respect to healthcare insurance. For instance, Donald Trump is trying to repeal and replace so called Obamacare, which is actually called the Affordable Care Act. And as a result of that measure, millions of people will lose health insurance. So he highlighted that as an example of a major difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And he also touched on the issue of police brutality, citing the example of Clarence Crutcher being killed and the officer Betty Shelby being found not guilty. He also cited the example of Walter Scott being killed by a police officer in South Carolina. And he basically said that Hillary Clinton would have taken a different approach to that whole issue than Donald Trump, basically suggesting that Donald Trump would have been more supportive of the police who committed those acts than Hillary Clinton would have been. And Cornel West talked about how Hillary Clinton gives a lot of speeches about a lot of different things, but there's no integrity that goes along with those speeches, basically meaning that she will say anything that sounds good, but when it comes to actually implementing policy to affect that particular issue, that's where she'll fall short, or she'll say something for the sake of gaining votes, but really never follow up and take the appropriate action. So that was his criticism of her. And also, they were having this debate. And Bill Maher basically said that this is important because people need to think about this in terms of the next election. They need to be thinking about essentially who's going to be the better president. It's not about having the best choice, like not having a situation where you have two great choices. He was basically saying that that rarely occurs, and basically people have to make a responsible decision, a responsible choice, and pick the better candidate under the circumstances. So that's a summary of their debate, what they were arguing about. I will include a link in the description box so that you can watch that debate for yourself. But I want to provide my analysis of this whole debate. This is something that you hear every year. People always talk about voting for the lesser of two evils. This is not anything new. I'm sure that many people have heard this stuff before. So this is what I'll say to this. First of all, I think that it undermines a person's credibility when they suggest that the two major parties are the same. When they suggest that a candidate like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are the same. I mean, there are obvious policy differences between those two candidates. There are obvious policy differences between the two major parties. There are some similarities, but there are significant differences between those parties, and those differences should not be downplayed, because when you do so, it undermines your credibility, and it undermines Cornel West's credibility when he suggests that somehow that both of these candidates were equally as bad, or that both of the parties are equally as bad, when they're not. Hillary Clinton would have been the lesser of two evils. Now, I've already explained like why I didn't support her, and I'm going to go into some of that here in this video right now. But I never suggested that the two were the same. There are major differences between the two, and Hillary Clinton would have been a better alternative than a Donald Trump for obvious reasons. Now, I want to deal with, before I go into more in depth into some of the other points that I want to raise, I want to deal with this question of police brutality. First of all, I think that on the local level, Nothing would have changed in the Terrence Crutcher case if Hillary Clinton was the president. That police officer, Betty Shelby, still would have been found not guilty. And we're reminded of that reality when we look at the Obama administration. Even though you had a black man in the White House, someone who was far more progressive than a Donald Trump, you still had situations like the Eric Garner situation where that brother was choked live on camera, choked to death by a cop. The cop was not indicted. You still have, situations like the Michael Brown situation where this brother was killed. And according to several witnesses, he had his hands up at the time when he was shot. And they let his body lay in the street for hours. But, there was no indictment in that case. Darren Wilson was not indicted. So those are just a couple of examples of how, regardless of who's in the White House, that won't necessarily change the outcome in these individual cases of brutality, police brutality. It won't change on the individual level in these individual cases. So that's my point. But when it comes to changing the practices in police departments, that's where it matters. And there is a difference between the Obama administration and this Trump administration when it comes to addressing the issues of police brutality in these police departments, when it comes to addressing the issue of racial profiling in these police departments. As I pointed out in other videos, the Obama administration entered many consent decrees with several police departments to end discriminatory policing practices, to end police brutality in those particular departments. But here you have, under Jeff Sessions, an effort to reverse all of that, an effort to reevaluate these consent decrees. You have a man in Jeff Sessions who does not want to enter consent decrees with police departments. This man is all about protecting police. This man is all about law and order. So that's another tangible difference between the parties. And I'm sure that if Hillary Clinton was elected, she would not have reversed or consider reevaluating all these consent decrees the way a Jeff Sessions, for instance, is. They would have taken different positions with respect to voting rights and a whole host of things. So there is a difference between a Donald Trump and a Hillary Clinton. There's a difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, and Hillary Clinton would have been a better president than Donald Trump. And that's not saying much because Donald Trump is a horrible president. This man hasn't been in office much longer than 100 days, but yet his administration is tangled up in all kinds of controversy. Yet in that 100 plus days, this man is already trying to reverse civil rights in the areas of police brutality and voting rights and other areas. So yes, there is a difference. But my point is this: Hillary Clinton was not the only candidate running against Donald Trump. There were far more progressive candidates running against Donald Trump. And I think that people have every right to vote for somebody who is more progressive than a Hillary Clinton. People had the opportunity to elect one of the most progressive people to ever run for the Democratic nomination. They could have elected Bernie Sanders. But as Cornel West pointed out, the Democratic Party did everything in their power to undermine Bernie Sanders. The DNC was basically working for Hillary Clinton. So they prevented him from winning the nomination. So my point is this: people could have voted for Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. And people should be entitled to vote that way. They shouldn't be pressured and bullied into voting for Hillary Clinton. They shouldn't have been. And that's what was going on during the election. People were trying to pressure people into voting for Hillary Clinton. And it turns out that Hillary Clinton was a weak candidate against Donald Trump. And there were all kinds of polls that were already out there predicting that Bernie Sanders would have been a greater opponent against Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton. But people completely ignored that and they just went with the safe choice. They went with so called electability, and it turns out the so called electable candidate was not electable. And the reason why she wasn't electable has to do with her being a phony, presenting one face to the public and then having another face when she meets with the donors to her campaign, another face when she meets with the Wall Street people, when she meets with the corporations. So, I mean, the woman got exposed as a phony, when those emails were released to the public and all that stuff. And it's just a prime example about, this false argument about electability. I mean, people were saying, well, people should just vote for Hillary because she's more electable. And it turns out she wasn't. And this is the second time that she has lost in a race for presidency. I mean, that should have been, I mean, the first time she lost should have been a sign that she's not that electable. And then she lost this one. So she obviously wasn't that electable. And that should be the lesson learned here. I mean, basically, Bill Maher was saying that the lesson learned is that we should vote for the lesser of two evils and just continue to vote for people like Hillary Clinton. That's not the lesson, because people like Hillary Clinton lose. People like Al Gore lose because these candidates are not genuine candidates. People can see through the phoniness. They can see through the charade. And I think that when people put electability over principles, they are undermining democracy. What they are doing is they are perpetuating mediocrity. They are perpetuating and protecting the status quo when they support these right-wing people who are masquerading as progressives. That's what they're doing. And as Cornel West pointed out, I mean, although there are differences between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, I mean, there are some troubling aspects of Hillary Clinton's agenda. I mean, as I pointed out in my videos where I explained why I did not support her, this woman supported the crime bill, which perpetuated mass incarceration of black people. This woman supported so-called welfare reform, which resulted in poor people losing life-saving benefits, having a reduction in their benefits and assistance that they receive for their families. This woman supported deregulation of Wall Street, which eventually led to the collapse of the market, leading to many people losing their houses and all that kind of stuff. And the list goes on and on. We do not have to support these mediocre candidates. And although Bernie lost the primary, even during the election after the primary, you still had a progressive candidate running in Jill Stein. And even though, people had all these arguments about electability, it comes down to positions on issues for me. It's not about just somebody's quote unquote electability. It's about where do they stand on issues that are important to me and my community. Jill Stein was the only candidate running who was supporting reparations. One of the only candidates supporting truly progressive issues when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, when it comes to dealing with Wall Street, when it comes to criminal justice issues. So I think that if we're to move forward as a society, we have to have courage. We have to have the courage to go against the grain. We have to have courage to think outside of the box. Because as long as you're confined within the box, society doesn't move forward. I'm sure that there was a time when people thought it was unimaginable that there would be an end to apartheid in South Africa. I know that there was a time when people thought it would be impossible for Nelson Mandela to be president of South Africa. I know that there was a time when people thought it was impossible for an African American to be elected president of the United States. I'm sure that at a time people thought it would be impossible for man to go to the moon or for man to even be able to fly. But those people that had vision and those people who had courage, those people who sacrificed were able to make those dreams become a reality. And I think that in order for us to change the political reality, we have to think outside of the box. We have to go beyond the confines that they give us, beyond the narrow definitions and choices that they try to present to us, and not just limit ourselves to the Democrats and the Republicans. So those are my thoughts on this. Tell me what you think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.